Morning all, and welcome to the next of our coffee morning or coffee breaks. And this is the second time we have had a guest speaker, and today it's Tom Blandford, corporate finance partner at Armstrong Watson. So good morning, Tom.
Good morning, thank you.
So what we, as normal, as you know, Tom, we just have a bit of a chat about what's happening in the marketplace and what's going on. I think we've all got our own views of the market having slowed down for M&As, and perhaps just if you could give us your thoughts on what's happening in the marketplace on the M&A front for law firms.
Yes, slowed down, yes. However, I think it would become my answer. Inevitably, the various mergers and acquisitions that we as Armstrong Watson were involved in all crashed to a halt around the back end of March and early April. However, a significant number, not quite all, are actually now back on again. I think that's common, not just in law firm and M&A. I think that was just UK writ large, wasn't it? We all kind of stopped for probably 2 or 3 weeks in early April, but actually people have worked their way through it. So as I sit before you now, we as Armstrong Watson have got something in the rounds of kind of half a dozen to 10 or so, which are somewhere in a process. They're probably going a little slower than they would have done, but I think that's as much a function of logistics as anything else. So yes, slowed down, but probably back to 80% of normal.
Interesting. I suppose my feeling, I had 4 on the go before lockdown. I think only one's come back on. The others, 2 I think are definitely off. The other 2 are considering prices and values. So I suppose that's the next question. What are you seeing in terms of values and prices and multipliers, discounts to net assets, etc.? What's your experience now?
So thus far, I haven't seen any changes to that yet. Now, that could be a function of the fact that many of those deals existed before the lockdown, and so it's a continuation of an existing deal, if you see what I mean. And actually, I'd probably note that that is to the credit of the various acquirers, if you see what I mean, is that they are not necessarily using it as a price chip at this stage. And I don't want to get too sort of mathematical about it, but I think if you start down that rabbit hole, you actually end up with pluses and minuses, if you see what I mean. Because, if I sit here and go, well, your conveyancing department is less valuable than it was yesterday, then quite reasonably, somebody would turn around and go, yes, but my wills and probate department is more valuable. So, where do you want to play this game, sort of thing?
I'm interested. I've only seen one price chipping on, but it's not a law firm, it's an IFA firm, and there's a little bit of price chipping. But what we've managed to do is just on the cash flow is to keep the price the same, but the payments have been extended a little bit. So, but on the law firm ones, I agree, no price chipping.
What about multipliers versus net assets? I think in one of your own webinars, you were saying it tends to be moving more towards net assets.
Yes, and I think it's important to understand that there is a significant proportion of law firms that don't have the multiple approach, which would result usually in a goodwill. That's the important thing. So there's many firms out there that don't necessarily have inherent goodwill, which would lead you down that net assets route. But in noting that that is thousands of firms that are in that category, that isn't to say that there aren't firms out there that do achieve multiples. And so there's almost that very initial fork in the road of which category am I in before I start anything else. And there is obviously plenty of examples in the marketplace of firms that have achieved that. So how do you know if you're in that camp becomes the question. And the easy but slightly annoyingly high-level answer is that there has to be something that the acquirer can hang their hat on, and that thing is usually, sometimes it's a very, very niche bit of law. If you do something particularly clever that nobody else does, there's an argument there. But it need not be that. It can just sometimes just a quirk of geography. The particular ways that the particular valleys happen to work meant that this particular law firm had a monopoly on a bunch of very, very wealthy farmers and landed estates, and so could honestly turn around and say, we're a ridiculously profitable firm and we want somebody to pay us over the odds.
That's something that a PE house would love much more than a traditional firm.
Oh, gosh.
It's replicable, and you don't need the management. The niche advice stuff is difficult. I was firms always have a different price point depending on who the buyer is, because your little firm in North Yorkshire, if it's in the middle valley and there's an acquirer who's got the valley either side, it's worth a lot more to them than it is to somebody else.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned geography, because I've never particularly thought of it in the M&A context, but on an operational basis and looking at profitability opportunities, I found geography to be really, really important in the fortunes of so many firms that I've worked with, not just in terms of the clients that they can attract, but also in from a recruitment point of view. You've opened my eyes there, Tom. Thank you.
I also think generically clients are getting more educated and more capable of using the internet and all that kind of. I'm not saying there's not something else going on, but there is a percentage of clients who do just use the firm I've always used. And certainly if I'm advising the acquirer, one of the things I always say is keep the shop front and keep the telephone number, at least for the first few months and probably for a good chunk of time, because with no disrespect to any solicitor out there, there are a bunch of clients out there who don't have a bloody clue who we are. They don't know who Tom Blandford is, but they do know the telephone number, or they do know where my office is. And so the physical inertia of my solicitor is the third door down on the left next to the butcher's. They don't care what the name is above the door, but they do physically know where that solicitor's is, and they'll walk in and instruct you because that's their solicitors.
There's a bit more than that as well, Tom. There's the whole element of trust and building up trust, isn't there? And if you've got somebody who's in your own local community, they will be mixing with people they're not going to upset you and make a cock up because they're going to be worried about the effect on the other people that you and they know. So I think there is that trust element, and the trust element of actually getting to meet people face to face. I found, for example, during lockdown, I don't think I picked up any new work from people that I've not met before, because of that trust element. You need to meet people face to face, and doing it over the internet, I think it can work, but professional services purely over the internet isn't ideal.
It's not ideal, but I have picked up some new work, I suppose on a recommendation, but people I've not met, but there's been a link.
Tom, can I just bring you back? You were talking about multipliers. Let's just go a little bit more on multipliers, and I guess you probably answered it, but let's try to get you to focus a little bit more. What typical multipliers are you going to say? You're going to say there aren't anything typical.
I knew you were going to, and I knew you were going to ask that, and yes, that's absolutely my answer. How long is a piece of string? I guess what I can do is work backwards. So unlike a few years ago, there are now listed law firms. Mm-hmm. So if you go to those PLCs and do the mathematics, it would suggest that the price earnings ratio is something in the rounds of times 6.
I suppose I personally would have said more like 4 and 5.
And I don't disagree with you, because I suppose that's the point to make, is if the Googleable figure is something like 6, that now represents the absolute top end, what a listed PLC can achieve. So therefore, any other firm has to be a number less than that, and probably numbers significantly less than that. So more commonly, 2, 3, 4 maybe at the outside.
Right.
But I say it's the distinction I make is that a few years ago there was no line in the sand. There was no mathematics that you could do. I think now what you can do is you start with the mathematics, work backwards, and then ultimately you end up with a willing buyer and a willing seller.
And I'm sorry to interrupt there due to time constraints. This is the end of part 1 of our discussion with Tom Blandford about the valuation of law firms and M&A activity. But watch out for part 2 coming to a laptop near you soon.